The dawn of January 12th. Pilots and technicians, huddled in small groups near their airplanes, listened to the silence. No gunfire, no engine noise. Over the airfield hovered a solid low cloud. Large flakes of snow were slowly falling to the ground. It seemed that in such weather the offensive would not take place. After all, aviation cannot act. Suddenly the rumble of hundreds of guns and mortars broke the morning silence. The airfield was located near the leading edge, and it seemed that the shooting is at the edge of the airfield. After a short time the artillery fire subsided. What does this mean, I thought, being at the airplane among the pilots? I had previously heard the artillery preparation. It was conducted, as a rule, for an hour or even more. And here it was so short. It was the first time. Half an hour passed. And again the mighty rumble of thousands of guns and mortars ripped the sky. Our front commander is being sly, I thought. The tornado of fire and bursts raged for almost 2 hours, destroying trenches with manpower, defensive fortifications and military equipment of the enemy, his nearest reserves. The artillery preparation ended when it was already quite light. We were ready to take off, but the weather was clearly not on the side of aviation. Clouds as if pressed us to the ground. According to meteorologists, the clouds hung 100 to 200 meters above the airfield, as well as in the area of the breakthrough. In such conditions, the appearance of large forces of enemy aircraft over the front line was also impossible. Could act only single aircraft or small groups of attack aircraft. However, there was a call from the headquarters, the order to fly large groups of fighters to cover the advancing troops. Realizing the complexity of the meteorological situation, I decided to send on patrol groups consisting of links and pairs. The first to fly out should be Zerdev's squadron of experienced pilots. Before the flight I give instructions to patrol under the lower edge of clouds over our troops. Do not go to the rear of the enemy. You'll run into anti-aircraft guns. At such a low altitude they'll shoot you down. Yes, comrade commander. Zerdev answers cheerfully. Permission to take off. Take off. Be careful. Avoid the anti-aircraft guns. Warned again. The four took off and immediately disappeared behind a wall of fog mixed with snow. I felt uneasy. I decided to wait on the airfield for the return of the group. An hour later there was a sound of engines in the air, and 3 fighters landed one after another. There was no airplane with Zerdev's flight number. Where was the 4th? Anxiety turned into tension. The pilots were walking without joyful smiles, which usually were after successful sorties. They stopped, for some time silently looked into my eyes. I understood that it was difficult for them to report the loss of the leading man, Squadron Commander Zerdev. I was also silent, constrained by the thought of his death. With Zerdev we fought together from the Cuban. There he flew in my squadron leading the second pair and risking himself, more than once covered me from the attacks of enemy fighters. It was hard to realize that he was gone. Report in detail, what happened to Zerdev? I broke the silence. He died. Shot down by an anti-aircraft gun, Sukhov, the leader of the second pair in the group, said with difficulty. Then he and Berezkin, Zerdev's wingman, told me about the brave pilot's last combat flight. When patrolling over his troops, the unit did not detect the air enemy. This was to be expected in such weather. At the end of the flight, Zerdev and his group went deep into the rear of enemy defences. Near the town of Saksin, the unit found itself in a zone of strong anti-aircraft fire. The enemy concentrated it mainly on the leader. Zerdev did not leave the tracks in the clouds, apparently afraid to break the formation of the group. The Elikon shells hit the airplane and it caught fire. Heaving from under the tracks and trying to shoot down the flames, Zerdev steeply descended to the ground and took a course to his advancing troops. But he didn't make it. He, apparently badly wounded, landed unsuccessfully, hit a crater and crashed the plane. Retreating enemy infantrymen rushed to the damaged machine. Viktor Zerdev, who gave his life for the liberation of Poland, was buried in Sandomir. From eyewitnesses, Polanders and tankers, who soon came to the place of Zerdev's death, it became known about the atrocity of fascist soldiers. Hitlerites tore off the wounded Zerdev's uniform with orders and stabbed him with knives. The successful breakthrough of the first line of enemy defences by the armies provided the entry of tank armies Rybolko and Lilishenko into the breached gap. Front Commander I.S. Konev boldly threw them into the offensive. Following the command post of the tank army, I saw turned trenches and broken firing points, piled with dead soldiers and officers of the enemy, burned military equipment. The work of our artillerymen deserved the highest praise. The tankers, having defeated the nearest enemy reserves, came to the operational space and resolutely advanced to the rivers Nida and Water. They sought to capture the rear lines of defense before the retreating enemy units and reserves. The weather during the first days of the offensive did not improve. This constrained the aviation, both ours and the enemy's. In the future, we should have expected active actions of fighters of the air defense of the Silesian Industrial Region and Berlin, which were armed with 4 gunfighters Focke-Wulf 190. I left K. Vishnevetsky, the assistant for tactical and firearms training, in charge of the fighters and returned to the division headquarters. I decided to take urgent measures to relocate regiments. We could not lag behind the advanced formations of the tank army, especially as we approached the Oder. Low cloud cover allowed to fly out to cover only small groups, which included the most experienced pilots of the regiments. Encounters with the air enemy were rare, and our fighters flying at low altitude over the advancing tankers, their presence, ground attack targets supported them. The absence of enemy aircraft in the area of cover allowed our pilots to make surprise strikes on retreating enemy columns, sometimes even in our rear. It was, although small, but a real help to the advancing troops. It is also important that from the air we were always watching the enemy and conducting reconnaissance. I managed to make several combat sorties myself. This allowed me to more concretely lead groups to set real tasks. Once, however, justified the saying on the catcher and the beast runs. On one of the days of the offensive suddenly dissipated the lower tier of clouds. We could expect a raid of large forces of enemy aviation. Regiments began to raise more powerful groups for patrolling. I flew out as part of the 8. The second link in it instead of the dead A. Klubov was headed by the deputy commander of the regiment Arkady Fedorov. In the area of cover Tiger reported the approach of a large group of the enemy from the west. We immediately went to approach it. I saw a column of 4 9 bombers and going on the flanks and above 4 links of fighter escorts. To attack the bombers from the rear hemisphere will not give the fighters. The only possibility to make a frontal strike assessed the situation and gave the command. All consecutively, in pairs, attack the bombers head-on. Attack. With a slight overrun, I'm going to the leader. This is the commander of the bomber group. I'm aiming. He climbs on a powerful trace of fire from all points of weapons and, leaving behind him a plume of smoke, falls to the ground. I transfer the sight to the leader of the last 9. The line has passed by. It is difficult to hit the target when skipping. Fighting turn out on the upper links of the Focke-Wulf 190. I glanced at the bombers. 2 more Ju-87s were falling behind the one I shot down. Later I learned that Sukhov and Fedorov had destroyed them. The rest, having dropped bombs from horizontal flight in the field, were hastily turning to the west. Fokkers came to their senses after our surprise attack and pounced on us. Feeling their superiority in strength, they fought actively, but not always skillfully. A vertical merry-go-round began. Apparently these were pilots Hitler's air defense, not yet experienced in fighting with fighters. Having lost 5 machines, Fokkers began to leave the battle, usually diving to the ground. It was inexpedient to pursue them. Our group was in scattered pairs. And the job was done. The combat task was accomplished. A bombing attack on our tankers was thwarted. 3 bombers and 5 Focke-Wulf 190s were shot down, according to reports from the Tiger. We have no losses. The other day the joyful mood was dampened. Alexander Ivanovich received a radiogram from the Tiger. Vishnevetsky died. During the relocation of the command post column of vehicles attacked by a Focke-Wulf 190, and Vishnevetsky in the turmoil hit by a car, reported Abramovich. As if fate is pursuing, I said. Next to joy there are also misfortunes. This is peculiar to war, and you, Alexander Ivanovich, should fly to the control center. The news about the capture of Seastokow by the tankers. They'll be ready to receive our fighters at the airfield by midday. The regiments must fly there today. There will be those who like to take it first. We're already starting to fall behind the tankers. Tell the regiments to prepare for the relocation. I'll fly out there with my team right away. Don't delay in relocating the headquarters. The advance team has already left. The rest of the HQ will leave by evening. Good, see you in Czestochowa. And I thought, well done, Chief of Staff. He was very efficient. A couple of hours later, my group landed on the ground, next to a blasted concrete runway. I looked around the airfield. There was nothing to think about repairing the runway. Clumps of concrete slabs and huge craters covered it from end to end. Having organized the control of arriving planes, and having determined the place of parking of regiment's planes, I went to say goodbye to Konstantin Vishnevetsky. It was a heavy loss since the beginning of the Vistula Order operation. Ridiculous death on the eve of complete victory over Nazi Germany took out of our ranks an outstanding pilot, an intelligent commander, a hero of the Soviet Union. No one should be blamed for his death. He died in combat conditions. According to the stories of the officers of the CP, Vishnevetsky was riding in the column on a trophy motorcycle. Suddenly the vehicles were fired upon by 4 Focke-Wulf 190s. The driver of one of the trucks sharply tore off the road towards the field and hit Vishnevetsky, who was riding on the side. I ordered to bury the brave pilot in Lvov. The pilots and officers of the division headquarters who flew to Czestochowa bid him farewell. All military honours were given to the glorious son of the fatherland. Early in the morning, our divisional CP left to catch up with the corps of the tank army of General P.S. Rybolko, which had gone ahead. They were rapidly advancing on Jelz and Breslau. Soon they overtook the command post of the tank army and began to advance together with it. Immediately after the liberation of Jelz to Rybolko arrived Front Commander Izkonov. With him were other generals, including the commander of the Air Army Ser Krasovsky. After the meeting, having found a convenient moment, appealed to Stepan Akimovich, asked to relocate the division to the airfield in Elsa. I won't allow it. The Ilias will be stationed here. You've already seized the airfield in Czestochowa. I was going to land attack planes there. Comrade Commander, the division is more than 100 kilometers behind the front line of the tank army. In the battles on the Oder and for Breslau, we won't be able to reliably cover the tankers. And the weather is improving. Rybolko will not take Breslau. He'll go south, along the Oder. We have to cover his movement into Silesia. Then we'll see what to do, where to relocate. It's clear. We'll try to protect the tankers from enemy aircraft. That's another matter. Having boldly turned the tank army to the south, Konov strove to reduce the losses of troops during the liberation of the Silesian industrial region, to avoid fighting in the cities, among the factories with reinforced concrete and brick buildings. And most importantly, to preserve this important industrial centre of Poland from destruction. It was a clever and far-sighted decision. The approach of the tank army from the west, this decisive manoeuvre, he threatened to encircle the troops of the Silesian grouping and forced it to hastily withdraw in order to break the Hitlerite formations on the open ground. Our division did everything to protect the army of General P.S. Rybolko from air strikes, to give it the opportunity to advance rapidly along the Oder. After the arrival of brigades from Opeln, I was ordered to switch to cover the 5th Guards army of General Azhadov, who seized the bridgehead behind the Oder. Arriving at the CP of this association, I reported to the commander about the task. Azhadov familiarized me with the situation, emphasized the need to reliably cover the troops on the bridgehead, as well as the crossing of the Oder. This army included corps known from Stalingrad, commanded by Generals Baiklanov and Rodimtsev. We deployed our command post near the river on the barrier dam, next to the control center Baiklanov. Contacted by radio with the division headquarters and set regiment's combat tasks. Soon over the crossing appeared over the 8 of our fighters. It led to Svetkov. Ours arrived in time when on the approach to the area was detected a large group of U-87 dive bombers and fighters, Focke-Wulf 190. Svetkov, I'm Tiger. Bombers with Fokkers are approaching the bridgehead. Strike group to attack the bombers, the top 4 to restrain the Fokkers. Let's go. A swift blow of our group of fighters and 2 bombers and 1 FV-190 fell into the Oder. 2 parachutists were whirling in the air. They descended in the location of our troops, on the bridgehead, Again in the air rumbled lines of guns and machine guns. Bombers, not reaching the crossing, hastily dropped bombs and turned to the west. Soon another Fokker crashed into the ground. The rest were flying away from the battle. One of the enemy fighters, apparently confused in fright, dived toward our CP. Svetkov was chasing him. Svetkov's line hit not only the enemy machine, but also crumbled the dam near the CP. The hit Fokker tried to turn around and go behind the Oder, but our pilot drove it into the ground with the second line. On the embankment, behind the dam, gathered up to 50 soldiers and officers. They were closely watching the air battle, listening to my commands to the fighters. The air battle is over, a respite. Suddenly shells whistled overhead, explosions in front of the dam, among the houses where Baklanov's CP was located. German artillerymen, apparently, spotted us and were shooting. It was not safe to be on the dike. We were taken in the fork of explosions. But the dignity of the commander did not allow us to leave. The situation diffused Adjutant Baklanova. On behalf of the commander, he asked to leave everyone behind the dam, passed the invitation to come to him for breakfast. The reason is good and timely. I hear the voice of one of the officers of the CP, without breakfast cannot fight. I ordered everyone to go downstairs, out of sight of the enemy. I went to the commander himself. Baklanov met me with an angry reprimand. Why did you all climb up the dam and loom there? Because of you, we were left without breakfast. The kitchen's wrecked, the cook's wounded. We'll have to eat canned breakfast. I apologize. But it's very convenient to watch the air from the causeway. Breakfast went without hot food, and that was my fault. From the commander's control post, I was informed that downed fascist pilots were delivered there, and I was asked to come for their interrogation. I left immediately. It was important to hear the enemy's opinion about our actions, to get new information about the enemy's air grouping. The first to arrive was the pilot from the downed Focke-Wulf 190. He immediately stated that he would not testify, motivated by the fact that he was a member of the fascist party since the early 30s. He was a hardened enemy, a convinced Nazi. Then they brought in a major, the commander of a group of bombers. He willingly gave comprehensive answers to questions, reported a number of important and interesting information. It turned out that he and the other pilots of the bomber group were instructors at the aviation school in Brno. The school, as well as others, was disbanded and all pilots were sent to combat flying units and the technical staff to infantry troops. This combat flight was the first and the last for him. He frankly complained about the shortage of flying personnel, especially experienced pilots with combat flying experience. This was a pleasant news for us. Our pilots in hard fights in the past years of the war knocked out the enemy's experienced flying staff. Now the fascist command opposes us with untrained, inexperienced pilots. Do the fascists think that they will still be able to save the situation? Or is it the agony of a dying beast? Now we are the masters of the air. The commander of the Air Army informed me about preparations for the Lower Silesian operation in early February. The task was to encircle Breslau, a major city and industrial center. Based on this, the fighting of our division should move north, facing regiments in Czestochowa because of the great distance from the proposed area of operations did not allow the effective use of fighters in the upcoming operation. It was necessary to immediately look for airfields closer to the Oder. According to the reconnaissance map, I chose an airfield with a concrete strip Altdorf, near the small town of Kreuzberg, and decided to personally inspect it. Toward evening, after our groups had finished patrolling over the bridgehead, I drove out to Altdorf. At dusk we did not meet a single automobile. We approached an asphalted road. Across it and to the right, well visible traces on the clay from passing cars. To the left, where we were going, the asphalt was clean. Vasil turned to the left. Having looked at the map, I tell my driver, a former petty officer who used to drive Krasovsky. Comrade Commander, you can't go that way. The asphalt is like a mirror. There are no traces of cars. Apparently the road is mined. We'll blow ourselves up. The arguments are strong, but there is no time to wander now, at dusk, to look for the village of Altdorf in the forest. And soon it will be dark. Meanwhile the road leads to the settlement we need. I looked at the asphalt once more, nothing suspicious. Let's take a risk, Vasil. God won't give us away, the pig won't eat us. Let's go. Soon the road went through the forest. It blocked the view. You feel tense. A turn to the right, and a large group of German soldiers with automatic rifles and machine guns appeared in front of us 100 meters away on the road, and on the side of it. Vasil, full throttle. Push, I shouted to the driver, and myself trying to pull a pistol out of the holster under my fur flight pants. The Germans parted on the road, and we passed within 2 meters of them. I'm waiting for machine gun bursts in the back. 100 meters later, the road turned to the right, and the enemy group was left behind, hidden by pine trees. "We have a lucky car," said the driver at last. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and reached for a flask of water. He kept his eyes on the road. Why didn't they shoot? They took them for their own, did not have time to see, I thought. Yes, we happily escaped from mortal danger. A few kilometers later we entered Altdorf. It was as if it had died out. Not a living soul. No light in the windows. Soon we noticed a dimly flickering window in one of the houses. Smoke was coming from the chimney. Vasil, drive up to the house. Someone's there. Learning from bitter experience, I slipped the gun under the belt of my pants and entered the house. An old German was sitting by the stove. "Good evening," I said in German. From my voice, the old man jumped up in fright and stood at attention. "I'm trying to find out the location of the airfield." I used the whole stock of German words. Hardly understanding me, the old man showed his hand in the direction, began to explain something. In order not to wander in the darkness, I asked him to get into the car and guide us. After a little drive through the forest, we found ourselves at the airfield. At first sight, it disappointed me there was no concrete strip. It was a dirt airfield. At the edge of it near the forest, there were a few charred Fokkers, burned apparently during the retreat. "Comrade Commander, don't drive on the airfield. Maybe it is booby-trapped," pleaded the driver. "Let's go along the strip, and then the parking lots," I insisted. After the experience on the road, it seemed that everything terrible was behind us. We inspected the airfield. Then we drove the old man to the house. We have to go back. We took the highway to see Stestokawa. "Vasil, keep up the speed. If we run into anyone, it'll save us. Go on, but don't run the engine, or we'll have to spend the night in these woods." At 1 o'clock in the morning, we reached the division. The trip was risky, but extremely necessary. Chief of Staff Abramovich, I gave detailed instructions in the morning to send forward teams of the Airfield Battalion to prepare regiments and division headquarters to relocate to Altdorf. Warned about the wandering groups of the enemy. I slept until dawn like a dead man, and in the morning left for the CP. On the way, I decided to stop at the airfield again to have another look at it in daylight. Further, we drove along the road where we met with Hitlerites. We saw 3 burned trucks, killed and half-dressed soldiers. Apparently, they came across this group after us. Bad luck for our soldiers, Vasil. "You see, Comrade Colonel, we could also lie dead because of your disagreement with my advice," said Vasil sadly, riding around the dead. "Yes, Vasil. Apparently speed saved us here, as in air battles. We jumped out so suddenly, so quickly, that they didn't realize anything from the surprise." A few days later, the regiments began combat work from the airfield Altdorf. The first to fly out of it was Dolnikov's group. Patrolling 4 over the crossings of the Oder, Dolnikov received a warning from the point of guidance from the southwest on the approach of a group of the enemy. Do not allow it to the crossings. Soon the pilots of the group detected 6 Focke-Wulf 190s coming at them. Dolnikov ordered the second pair to gain altitude, and his went into a frontal attack. The enemy did not accept it and began to go up. Dolnikov had time to fire at the leader and shot him down. The second Fokker was set on fire by a pair of Sinutins above. In the course of the battle, Dolnikov shot another Fokker. The rest of the enemy fighters hastily, forcing the engines, left the battle, went down in the western direction. Our fighters had many such battles with small groups of Focke-Wulf 190s, despite the difficult weather conditions of early February. We had no losses. Only once a young pilot was almost killed because of his mistake. It happened west of the Oder. During the battle, he broke away from his group. Having no skills of piloting in difficult weather conditions, he got confused and, being alone, tried to take a course to the airfield, but lost orientation. At the bottom, he noticed a field near a populated area and decided to land. He thought that he was already in the liberated territory. He landed successfully. He saw a girl running towards him. He opened the cockpit and heard her screaming. "Where did you land?" "Germans are here. Fly away quickly, or they'll catch you." "Who are you and how did you get here?" "I was forcibly taken to Germany by the Germans. I work for a landowner. Fly away quickly. The soldiers are already running here." The pilot had enough determination to assess the situation, even managed to ask the girl the name of the settlement. Only after that the pilot gave gas and flew over the heads of the running soldiers. In those days, a heavy load lay on the bombers and attack aircraft. They bravely and decisively struck in the heat of anti-aircraft fire. In such conditions, one of the most talented pilots of bomber aviation, commander of the P-2 Dive Bomber Corps, General I.S. Polbin, died. That day he led a large group to bomb a military facility in Breslau. Pilots accurately went to the target. The group of bombers came under heavy anti-aircraft fire. But Ivan Semenovich Polbin, setting an example for the pilots of the whole group, as always cool and confidently behaved in these difficult conditions. But here an anti-aircraft shell exploded in the cockpit of the diving bomber of the Corps commander. From the falling burning P-2 ejected with a parachute only the gunner radiator. Polbin and his navigator, apparently severely wounded, did not leave the plane and fell with it into the waters of the Oder. The death of the brave aviation commander, twice hero of the Soviet Union Ivan Semenovich Polbin, was a heavy loss for the Air Force. All of us experienced this loss with bitterness. Improvement of weather in February brought new difficulties in our work. Combat operations were increasingly hampered by the pre-spring thaw that had begun. The dirt strip provided safe takeoff and landing only in the mornings, after night frosts. By the middle of the day it became warmer, the soil thawed, making takeoff and landing difficult. Airplanes on the run-up had a hard time breaking away from the viscous ground at the end of the runway, and at the limit pulled the forest on the border of the airfield. On landing, the wheels buried themselves in the ground. Several landing gear failures occurred. There could have been cowling of airplanes, breakage of propellers. We had to, as always in difficult conditions, to release on combat missions only experienced pilots. We in the headquarters puzzled over what to do. We realized that the spring thaw threatened to completely close the combat work, and to allow this was impossible. It was necessary to fly immediately to new concrete airfields with strips. When I met with S.A. Krasovsky, I asked him for permission to transfer regiments to the captured airfield in Opeln with a concrete strip. I received a refusal and a new task. The division was reassigned to cover the tank army of General P.S. Rebolko, operating on the right wing of the front. The base airfield was as slow west of Legnica. We were to be the first in the air army to make a throw over the Oder. We immediately sent out advance teams from the Airfield Maintenance Battalion, from the regiments and division headquarters. 2 days later came a brief message about the arrival of our groups in Oslo. I flew out in a pair of combat aircraft to inspect the condition of the airfield and decide on the relocation of regiments. Under us Oslo. I communicate by radio with the advance team. Suddenly I hear a warning. 100th. The dirt strip is dehydrated, unsuitable for landing. There's no concrete runway here. So much for the news. My thoughts are racing like a fever. What to do? Go back? There are no prospects ahead. Spring will crush us to the ground. We must look for a way out, and look for it not somewhere, but here. It's good that during the flight I carefully watched not only the air but also the ground. I decided to land on a 2-lane highway next to the airfield, or rather on one of its lanes. I go in for landing. Under me is a narrow strip of concrete no more than 9 meters wide. The wingspan of the plane is 12 meters and the landing gear spread is 4. It's risky, but you have to land. And there are cars on the highway. Although rare, they're coming. It made me go for a second round 3 times. On the 4th approach, the gap between the cars provided a safe run after landing. I landed and closed the gap with my airplane. A quest partner. Go Lubev, you can land. Can you handle it? Coming in for landing. Answers confidently, and indeed he landed successfully. Our landing was watched by officers who arrived with the advance team. Soon a car came and I went to inspect the airfield. The dirt strip was in poor condition. Thoroughly discussed the situation and made a decision the regiments to land on the highway. It was not easy, there could be serious breakdowns of airplanes. However, there was no other way out, we had to take a risk. Reasonable risk is a companion of victory. And in the future it justified itself. We successfully covered General Rebolco's tank army from the air, saved tankers from Fokker's assaults more than once. Immediately the work boiled over. The soldiers of the battalion made a bypass road around the new airfield, dragged large transport gliders, made barricades of them under the crossing bridges at the ends of our improvised runway. On the outer sides of the barricades we put shields labelled mines just in case. From the next morning we started the flight to the highway to Oslo. They flew in squadrons. The pilots landed on a 9-meter strip. The middle dirt part of the highway, separating the concrete strips, just began to fill in with broken bricks from the blown-up buildings at the airfield. Landing was directed by himself, by radio. He gave the pilots tips. Come in quietly. Land exactly on the middle of the runway and keep the direction without sharp work with brakes. Well done. Good landing. Before the bridge, turn right on the concrete road. By the middle of the day, more than 120 planes landed on the road. Not a single departure for the second round, not a single rough landing or breakdown. I think that in the history of aviation has not yet been a case of landing combat aircraft on the road width of 9 meters. And here a whole division landed. This was dictated by the combat situation. The pilots understood it and acted skillfully and coolly. Such a landing contributed to instilling courage in the flight crew. Courage, skill and risk are character traits inherent in a true fighter. Confident relocation to this airfield showed the presence of these qualities in the flying staff of our division. I believed that with such pilots can do wonders. In the second half of February was a difficult situation on the right wing of our front. Tank Army PS Rebolco by this time was already significantly weakened in the previous brutal battles. The offensive undertaken to reach the Neisse River and capture the towns of Lorben and Görlitz developed slowly. The enemy transferred to this area large reserves, actively supported by aviation. He disrupted the offensive, struck northeast of Lorben, bypassing from the east, drawn into the fighting corps of the tank army. There was a threat of their encirclement that in heavy defensive battles tankers and compounds of the Panzer Army of General K. Korotiv jointly reflected the blow of enemy tank divisions. The regiments of the Air Army, based on desiccated airfields east of the Oder at a great distance from the battle area, could not provide effective assistance to ground troops. The flight of our division on the highway came in handy. Being not far from Lorben, we could reliably cover Rebolco's and Korotiv's compounds from the air. In these conditions, our unit had an important and responsible task. The pilots understood it well. In the air they acted bravely and decisively. The first sorties brought the first victories. Sukhov's 4, patrolling in the area of fighting, was pointed at the Focke-Wulf 189. He was scouting and adjusting the fire of his artillery. Sukhov, west of you at an altitude of over 1,000 meters frame, followed the order from the command post. I see it. Attack, immediately responded the group commander. Spiking, he opened fire from a short distance. Frame from the bursts of shells collapsed in the air. After some time to the patrol area came the 2nd Focke-Wulf 189 accompanied by 4 Messerschmitts. From the control room gave a new signal. Sukhov, on the approach above you frame with Messers. Do not miss. At the command post and in the air understood that the enemy urgently needed data on the movement of our tank columns in the area. It was important to disrupt the reconnaissance. Sokov came out from below and shot the frame at point-blank range, and his wingman Kutishov shoots down the leading Mi-109 that tried to attack Sukhov. The rest of the Messerschmitts escaped. In this flight, Sukhov added to his account of downed Focke-Wulf 189, and also confirmed the fame of the best specialist in the destruction of aerial scouts. We all knew that he shot down the first frame almost 2 years ago in the battles near Melitopol. Groups of fighters flying on patrol that day had a number of air battles with groups of Focke-Wulf 190, which tried to storm our troops. The pilots thwarted the enemy's attempts to make targeted attacks on the Soviet ground units. In the evening, Sukhov's 4 pilots went out on patrol again. In the area of Lauban, his group from the control room was pointed at an air target. A dozen Fokkers tried to storm the ground units. "I see. I'm attacking. Kutishchev, cover." Sukhov commanded his wingmen and rushed down. In the scope of the Fokker, going with a gain in altitude. A burst from all points of armament and the enemy plane, bursting into flames, crashed into the ground. The rest of the Fokkers went on a shaving flight. It is impossible to pursue them. 2 more 4 Focke-Wulf 190 and a pair of Mi-109s are coming up. The frontal attack of Sukhov's unit on the first 4 was successful. The leading Fokker went down with a burning torch to the ground, but the wing of Sukhov's machine caught fire. The experienced pilot went for an emergency landing on the hit airplane. In pursuit of him rushed the second 4 Fokkers, not connected with the battle. Our anti-aircraft gunners, as they say, did not slumber. They drove away this group with powerful anti-aircraft fire from 37mm guns, covered our damaged fighter. Looking for an area for an emergency landing, Sukhov saw that the fire in the wing of his airplane disappeared during the cabling, and on descent it flared up again. He took advantage of this, began to maneuver. So reached the airfield and landed on a dirt strip. The first day of combat work of the division from the highway ended mostly successfully, without losses on our part. However, there were still few enemy planes shot down, and this means that tomorrow they will be in the air again. In the evening, I gathered commanders and chiefs of staff of regiments. The conversation was serious, sharp. Some leaders still had the habit of sending small groups of fighters on patrol. In the battles before the Oder and over the crossings, it was still understandable, to some extent justified. Then, in bad weather, it was impossible to carry out combat missions in large groups. And now normal weather. We are based on concrete, we have enough forces. Nevertheless, as a rule, Links and Sixes are sent out on patrols. They hardly fulfill combat missions, often fighting with numerically superior enemy. During the whole day, for example, from Retkolov's regiment, only some units were sent out on barrage. I demand from all commanders, I finished my review, to send to cover the troops reinforced patrols of 1 or 2 squadrons. Force must be met with force. Change to produce in the area of cover without delay. Passing Fokkers on the attack, unjustified losses of their pilots will be considered an emergency incident, with immediate and serious conclusions. With Abramovich thought over measures to strengthen control over the planning of sorties and the organization of combat work. In the morning, having checked the accuracy of the instructions, I went to the forward control center of the division, deployed near Buntslow. In the city, I stopped by our commandant. I clarified a number of questions, asked where the museum of Field Marshal Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov was located. I knew that the brilliant Russian commander at the head of the Russian troops pursuing Napoleon's army reached Buntslow. He died in that town. The fascists have abused the memory of Kutuzov, said the commandant. They liquidated the museum. The officer drove with me to this building. We entered the house. Nothing here no longer reminded of the stay of M.I. Kutuzov. It was good that there was at least a room where the last hours of the commander's life were spent. Then we drove up to the monument on the outskirts of Buntslow. Here is buried the heart of our great ancestor. We gave some honor to Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov. Arriving at the command post, the first thing I did was to send an order to Abramovich to allocate a group of soldiers and officers at the disposal of the commandant's office of the city. The commandant asked to help in the restoration of the museum of Kutuzov, and then already began to manage the fighting. That day the combat work was more successful. Reinforced groups of our fighters, meeting Fokkers on the approach to the area of cover, inflicted sensitive blows on enemy aircraft, were completely excluded strikes on ground units. The armies of Generals Rybalko and Korotiv successfully defeated the counter-attacking group of the enemy and threw it back over the River Kays. In air battles in these days, pilots acted skillfully, but unfortunately they did not avoid losses. One day the group of the commander Nikolai Klumov, having finished patrolling, was returning to the airfield. From the control room I saw that it was caught up with 6 Messerschmitts. They are trying to make a surprise attack on the 6 Klimov. immediately informed Klimov on the radio, gave the command, "Quick turn to the enemy." I could clearly see how our group vigorously went into a frontal attack. 5 Main 109 did not accept it and fell aside with a gain of altitude, and the 6th, the leading, stubbornly went towards it. Klimov threw his plane at him. In the air there was a strong explosion from the collision of fighters. To the ground Me 109 fell, spinning sheet, with the torn-off rear part of the fuselage, and next to him circled Cobra with a broken-off left wing. "Klimov, jump. Jump, jump," I shouted into the microphone. But Klimov apparently lost consciousness from the impact of the collision. Our plane fell on the outskirts of Bunslow. Fulfilling his duty as a Soviet soldier, Klimov rammed the challenged Nazi ace, awarded the Iron Cross. Klimov, a brave air fighter, was buried next to the monument to Kutuzov. Klimov's death was not the only loss. Once broke out a heavy battle of our squadron with a large group of Fokkers and Messerschmitts. I had to call on the radio reinforcement, urgently raised ready for Flight 4 headed by Squadron Commander Griffin. After a while I hear his report. I am Count came to work. Our fighters bravely and decisively entered the battle, shot down several enemy planes. The rest began to leave to the west. Griffin, pursuing the Me 109 escaping at low altitude, joined him in the tail and opened fire on the turn. At the same time, Messerschmitt was fired at by anti-aircraft gunners. A machine gun line hit Griffin's machine as well. The downed airplanes, enemy and ours, fell almost next to each other. When I arrived at the place of the fall, I saw arguing anti-aircraft gunners. They were proving to each other who shot down the planes, demanding confirmation from the tankers. "What are you arguing about? You fired on your own airplane. You see the stars on the wreckage of the wings." I angrily interrupted their argument. I found out the numbers of the units so that I could take action later. The only bullet hit our pilot in the temple. It was hard to experience the death of an outstanding officer. I liked Griffin for his desperation in battles, his ability to fulfill the most dangerous task. He was highly respected by the pilots. Combat life presented a variety of different, sometimes unforeseen cases. While covering ground units according to the plan, Deputy Commander of the regiment Andrei Trude with his group, not meeting the enemy in the air, decided to look at enemy tanks for the sake of curiosity. He descended to a low altitude and found himself under heavy anti-aircraft fire from the enemy. The airplane was seriously damaged. Labour still managed to reach his troops. He landed on his belly. When I learned about it, I immediately left the CP to the division. I met Andrei Trude already at the airfield, where he was brought on a motorcycle by a tanker. With a bandaged head but with a look of victory on his face, he appeared before me. "Comrade Division Commander, Captain Trude made an emergency landing on an airplane hit by anti-aircraft fire and arrived at the regiment. The airplane is badly damaged and cannot be repaired," he reported. I see him smiling. I was so angry. "I guess you expect me to praise you for your dashing cleverness. It's not heroism, it's stupidity. You almost got yourself killed, lost your warplane. Why did you have to go down over the enemy, into the anti-aircraft gun zone?" I wanted to get a better look at the German tanks, so to speak, in real life, so I descended. "I'll punish you severely for your stupidity," I threatened the captain. Then the cheerful smile disappeared. His face became sour. Let him think, I decided. There is still a lot of this reckless luck in him. All these cases led to sad reflections. It was necessary to work out measures to eliminate the appeared in the flight staff this lightweight attitude to the enemy on the threshold of our victory, 100 kilometers from Berlin. I devoted the next meeting with commanders and political officers to these problems, conducted a number of serious measures and our political department. We all realized that we cannot for a second to lose vigilance, alertness in action. We tried to make every pilot feel these feelings, act decisively and cautiously, reasonably and boldly. I was sure that only a combination of such qualities and gives birth to a real warrior, with a hot heart and steady hands, sober mind. It's a paradox. Pilots, knowing themselves in battle, began to act more boldly. There was a reasonable boldness, boundless confidence in themselves, in friends, in technology. They boldly went on the attack against the enemy, imposed their will. This confidence affected the appearance of the pilot. The calm dignity of an air fighter, capable of performing any task, gave nobility to the external features, the whole appearance of our pilot. And at the same time, there will be some recklessness, unnecessary dash in battle, sometimes some childishness. Every such breakdown means casualties, loss of equipment. Soon there was a short lull. In free time from combat sorties, flight staff regiments went to the Museum Kutuzov. Workers of the commandant's office have already done a lot to restore it. In the room where the commander died, there was an old iron bed, simple furniture, and stands with books dedicated to the military activities of Mikhail Ilarinovich. Everything was modest to the extreme. Kutuzov did not like luxury, especially in a combat situation. On one of the March days, there was a rally at the monument to Kutuzov. During the laying of wreaths over the monument at low altitude passed a squadron of our fighters under the command of Trofimov. It saluted by firing guns and machine guns in honor of our great ancestors. We paid tribute to the patriotism and bravery of Russian bombardiers. With battles they passed along this road. On it we, their descendants, are going to Berlin. Having suffered significant losses in air battles in late February and early March, the fascist command of the air group, operating against the troops of the right wing of the front, not resigned to defeat. It took all measures to discover our division and pay at least on the ground. We realized that this desire especially grew after our strike on the enemy airfield. And it happened like this. In one of the sorties, 8 under the command of Ivan Babak went behind enemy defences and struck a blow to the column of vehicles. When returning home, the pilots found an enemy airfield with a large number of fighters, transport planes U-52 and Focke-Wulf 189. There was nothing to strike at it, the ammunition was used up during the assault. After returning, Babak immediately reported on the airfield. Immediately a group was created to strike the enemy planes in 4 units. Tactics were thought over. They decided everything promptly, but carefully. And this ensured the success of the operation. Coming in from the west, the group suddenly jumped out on the airfield. Bondarenko's wing, which went forward, promptly attacked and shot down 2 patrolling Mi-109s and one of the pair that took off. The other wing poured its fire on the anti-aircraft guns and suppressed them. 8 under the command of Ivan Babak, becoming in a circle, successively went in attack, shooting planes in the parking lots. Hovering from above, a wing detected a U-52 approaching the airfield and burned it with a short attack. Having shot all the ammunition, Babak's group returned home without losses. At the enemy airfield, more than 10 machines were burned, the strip and buildings were damaged. And soon I was informed that a saboteur was detained not far from the airfield. Several parachutists were thrown out, and one was taken. He did not hide, but it was clear that our airfield was being searched. Fascist pilots, of course, did not expect that we were flying from the highway in the Aslo area. Taking all this into account, we began to camouflage the planes even better at the parking lots, hid them in the pine trees along the road, used a large hangar on the airfield. However, not everyone was affected by these concerns. The personnel of the anti-aircraft battery, assigned to us to cover the airfield, showed carelessness. This led to the discovery of our location and subsequent raids by enemy aircraft. Once, coming from the division headquarters to the airfield, I saw a 2-engine Scout Mi-210 coming from the west at an altitude of 200 meters. The anti-aircraft gunners who were in the dugout missed it. They opened fire at the tail of the Scout going to the east and of course did not shoot it down. And at this time, on a concrete platform at the hangar refueled, a group of planes arrived from a combat mission. It could be assumed that the Mi-210 had discovered our basing. We had to have a serious talk with anti-aircraft gunners and order them to sit at the helm of the guns from early morning until late evening. With regiments worked out a schedule of duty pairs and links in the air, over the airfield. A day or 3 later, over the highway at low altitude again flew Scout Mi-210. But now it was coming from the east. This time anti-aircraft gunners were vigilantly on duty, timely opened fire and hit the enemy plane. It fell on the field, not far from the airfield, and burned with the crew. A few days later, the airfield was attacked by 8 Focke-Wulf 190s. The group jumped out into a break in the cloud cover and dropped cluster fragmentation bombs. A pair of fighters was immediately radioed to the enemy. It was just making a training flight. The pilots managed to catch up with the departing enemy group and shot down one Fokker. Our airplanes were not damaged by the dropped bombs, but the squadron commander Veniamin Tsvetkov fell under the explosions. During the bombing, he rushed to the plane to take off and repel the blow of the Fokkers. A large piece of shrapnel stabbed him in the back, inflicting a fatal wound. Doctors did not have time to bring him alive to the infirmary. We buried V. Tsvetkov in Legnica, in the Polish land, for the liberation of which he spent many battles. When I was informed about this strike on the airfield, the first thing I asked where were the fighters on duty. It turned out that the command of the 16th Guards Regiment did not fulfill the established schedule of duty over the airfield. Considering it a waste of effort, did not raise in advance, according to the schedule, the link to barrage. This was a gross violation. If the link in the air, the raid would have been able to repel the approach of enemy aircraft to the airfield. For non-performance and other violations, the commander of the 16th Air Regiment was soon transferred to the post of inspector in the Corps, not related to the management of personnel. That's how it happens. The pilot gained combat experience, mastered the technique, learned to conduct air combat. Personally, in the air, fight acts confidently, on the account of more than a dozen shot-down enemy machines, noted for this award. And commanding qualities are low as a leader weak. Apparently, to bring up these qualities, it is not enough to be only brave and skillful air fighter. It is necessary to develop responsibility for subordinates, strictly ask and be demanding first of all to himself, deeply and self-critically assess their actions, develop the desire to analyze events, to try to anticipate them. The commander is given a lot of rights, and even more is asked of him, and the higher he is in his position, the greater his responsibility, and in combat conditions especially, because it is a matter of life and death, of victory and defeat. Performing combat tasks, practicing bombing and shooting at the range, we expected new raids on the airfield, constantly kept in the air a link or a pair. We took other measures. At the range created a false airfield, placing there German transport gliders. All this helped. A few days after the first raid over the airfield again appeared a group of Focke-Wulf 190. Using the same method of attack, Fokkers jumped out into the window of clouds and dropped bombs on gliders on our range. Not a single bomb fell on the airfield and the highway along which the troops of the Second Army of the Polish Army were advancing to the front. Barraging in the air, a fighter wing immediately attacked the enemy group and immediately shot down 2 Fokkers. The rest, without taking the fight, disappeared into the clouds. The downed German pilots descended on parachutes to the highway, to the location of the Polish column. I jumped into the car, drove up to the place where the parachutists landed. I see a Hitler pilot lying on the highway surrounded by Polish soldiers. Who killed him? Wow! He killed himself. As a wounded man, he parachuted down to the car, and from there he fell on the asphalt and broke his head, explained one of the Polish soldiers. And where is the second parachutist? In the staff car, under interrogation, with the commander of the Polish unit agreed immediately. Please hand over the pilot to us. We shot him down. His data is very important to us. At the division headquarters, the prisoner said that he was from the same airfield the Babak's group had stormed. They came to avenge for downed and burned planes, for lost pilots. Why did they drop bombs on gliders on the field near the airfield? I asked the prisoner. It seemed to us that these airplanes bombed on us, and your pilots, who were in the air, did not let us storm the runway of the airfield. It was, of course, pleasant that our camouflage measures and duty over the airfield in the air foiled the plans of the fascist command, saved combat aircraft and personnel. We did not give up patrolling over the airfield in the future, even with the receipt of a new, additional task. And it was not easy. We were informed that, according to intelligence, a group of German movie reporters headed by Goebbels himself were going to leave for Lauban. They decided to film the destruction in the city and make a chronicle movie called Atrocities of the Red Army. They were preparing a false propaganda to raise the spirits of German soldiers and to frighten the German population. We were ordered to watch the roads to Görlitz and Lauban, to shoot all vehicles passing there. I, however, did not believe that the film group will go in the daytime, in the zone of action of our aviation. But the order was given and it must be carried out. Every day, the pairs or squads flew out on a free hunt for cars, especially cars. Recently appointed commander of the 16th Regiment Ivan Babak also went on such a flight. Apparently, he decided to show the flight crew that he would be on an equal footing with everyone else to go on any mission. Having arrived at the airfield and met the Chief of Staff of the regiment Danish, I asked, "Where is the commander?" He flew off in pairs for free hunting. I advised to ask permission from you, but he was in a hurry. Who did he go with? With a young pilot, Kozlov. An odd choice for such a complex combat activity. I stayed at the CP to wait for Babak's return. Half an hour later, Kozlov landed on the highway. From him we learned the details of the disaster. Not having met cars on the road, the pair began to storm the detected railroad train and came under anti-aircraft fire. Babak's airplane caught fire. Not reaching the front edge of the defense of our troops, Babak apparently could not withstand the fire that broke into the cockpit, threw himself out with a parachute, and was captured by Nazi soldiers. In the area where he was supposed to have landed, 2 units were immediately sent in succession. There was still hope for rescue. But all was in vain. Ivan Babak was already a prisoner. The loss of a brave and competent pilot, hero of the Soviet Union, who had on his personal account more than 30 downed planes, caused a heavy psychological trauma. It was painful at the end of the war to bear such losses. In the terrible Nazi camps, cruel trials awaited him. In Moscow, it became known about the experience of combat work from the highway. A film group came to us to shoot a chronicle film Unusual Airfield. The film group worked in sweat. They filmed the most distinguished pilots and technicians, takeoffs and landings from the highway sorties for combat missions, everyday scenes. Then the cinematographers, so they were called for their eyes, asked me to organize the shooting of a real air battle. At first I refused them. Now there is a lull in the action. Air battles are rare in good weather, and today, under such weather conditions, the enemy will not appear over the front line. A waste of time. And suddenly, contrary to my predictions, from the west, along the highway, over us flew 4 Focke-Wulf 190 with bombs suspended under the wings. Quickly shoot them. I shouted to the cameraman, and myself rushed to the control of Bobrov Regiment. His fighters were on duty on schedule that day. The regiment commander jumped out to meet me from the CP. At the same time, the duty pair was turning over us. "Who took off?" asked Bobrov. "Lukantsev and Goldberg. They were on duty in the airplanes." "Goldberg? But he's a very young pilot and has no airplane shot down. They shouldn't have put him on duty in this weather." "They'll manage, Comrade Division Commander. Lukantsev has 5 victories," Bobrov reassured me. Tensely I looked in the direction of Legnica, where disappeared in the haze Fokkers and our pair. I was uneasy at heart. 4 enemy fighters, and ours only 2, and one of them inexperienced young pilot. Soon, 10 kilometers to the east, we heard the rumble of engines and volleys of cannon and machine gun fire. In the haze was not visible battle, but an explosion and a column of smoke to the right of the highway in the woods suggested the fall of the downed aircraft. Seconds later, a second column of smoke rose, already to the left of the freeway. In the clouds above us, we heard the fading rumble of the engines of airplanes going westward. Anxiety increased. Did they shoot down ours? I was ready to attack Bobrov, as a pair of planes emerged from the haze and went to land. All the tension immediately subsided, and the workers of the film group hurried to the car. They went faster to the place where the enemy planes had fallen. They were understandable. There were not enough enemy planes shot down for filming, and there were 2 of them on the ground at once. Within half an hour were filmed footage of burning Fokke, which fell on the outskirts of the village, where the headquarters of General Rybalko was located, interviewed tankers, eyewitnesses of the battle. Having taken the captured pilot in the special department of the tank army, everyone, satisfied, returned to the division headquarters. Lukantsev and Goldberg reported how the battle had gone. Having met an enemy group returning from Legnica, they engaged it on a turn under the lower edge of the clouds. Lukantsev attacked the rear 4 Fokkers and shot him down with the first line. The one with the pilot fell into the forest and exploded. At this time, Lukontsev tried to attach to the tail of the leading enemy group. But Goldberg acted decisively. He pierced it with a queue of guns, knocked off the tail feathers of the Fokker. The Nazi pilot still managed to throw himself out of the falling plane at a height of 200 meters and descended by parachute directly to our tankers. At the interrogation, the prisoner gave detailed answers to all questions. I asked him through an interpreter, "Who are you by position, and what was your task in this flight?" "I am the commander of the air group, or, in your opinion, the commander of the regiment. My air group was recently transferred from the Western Front to the Eastern Front, and set the task to find your secret airfield on the highway and strike it. We did not find the airfield, but met with your aces, and they shot down me and another one of our planes. Why were you awarded the Iron Cross?" "On the Western Front, I shot down 9 American Flying Fortresses B-17s. The prisoner confirmed the reports that reached us about the transfer of the fascist command of ground troops and aircraft from the Western Front to our Eastern Front. Fascist leaders, feeling their doom, were rushing around like doomed, trying to prolong their existence. They were gripped by panic fear of the Soviet army offensive. The film group, having successfully finished shooting the movie, left for Moscow. Regiments continued to fulfill combat tasks and were persistently preparing for the upcoming offensive. At the same time, we did not lower our vigilance, were ready to repel new raids on our airfield. We had to introduce an increased duty. Once, with the help of radar, detected a group of enemy planes heading for our airfield, immediately followed by a command to raise on-duty fighters to intercept. The squadron under the command of navigator of the 100th Regiment, Mikhail Petrov, took off without delay. About 30 kilometers west of Oslo, the formation met a strange group of enemy planes, which caused our pilots surprise. Accompanied by 8 fighters, flew bomber U-88, and on top of it sat Fokker. Later we learned that it was a kind of novelty of fascist aviation Junkers stuffed with explosives, and attached to it a fighter with a pilot controlling the flight of the bombing plane. The Soviet pilots quickly oriented themselves in the situation. Petrov gave the command to his second pair. "Sinuta, attack the escort fighters. I'll attack the Junkers." The Fokker pilot, seeing Petrov coming in to attack, put the U-88 into a dive and detached himself, but immediately fell under Petrov's attack and was shot down. The Junkers crashed into the ground near the freeway. The explosion was so powerful that it lifted up a cloud of earth, forming an impressive crater. The enemy escort fighters, having lost another airplane, did not take the fight and hurriedly withdrew in a westerly direction. This attempted raid on our airfield was the last. All of them were thwarted. The enemy aviation lost 8 airplanes and 10 pilots. In our division, there were no losses. In early April, I was summoned by General Krasovsky. In the headquarters of the Air Force begins to work out plans for the use of aircraft in the Berlin operation. "I want you to fly with me as a consultant on fighter aviation." "Thank you, Comrade Commander, for your trust." Ready to fly. On the way to Moscow, we passed over Warsaw. The capital of Poland lay in ruins. Not a single whole building could be seen. My tongue was cursing the fascist monsters. Warsaw remained in my memory for many years. At the meeting of the Air Force Command, I had to be only one day, when they discussed the principles of the use of fighter aircraft in the upcoming offensive operation. Krasovsky had to stay in Moscow. The commander allowed me to fly to Novosibirsk for one day. I carried my daughter in my arms for just a day, experiencing paternal joy for the first time. I did not want to part with her, with Maria and her mother. But there was still war, and it was necessary to finish the fascists. I returned to Moscow by special flight on Li-2 without delay. We flew to the front at the Opeln airfield. There was something to be surprised here. Hundreds of airplanes of all types, continuously interfering with each other, took off on combat missions, hastily landed. To my colleagues, Gorigliad and Krukov, at one time I offered suitable strips on the highway. But they did not follow my example, arguing that the spring thaw was coming to an end. Probably they were right. April was taking its toll. Dirt airfields quickly dried up, providing work from them as fighter units and bomber aviation. And on the ground, the concentration of troops was accelerated. To ensure their advance, we had to open the highway, and we ourselves moved to the dried Upper Slough airfield. Continuously day and night moved along the highway columns of units, vehicles with ammunition and fuel, artillery and tank formations. Huge forces were accumulating for a powerful all-destroying blow to the enemy on the Nisi and Spree. In these days, covering the areas of concentration of front troops, we saw from the air packed with units villages and woodlands. The soul rejoiced from the consciousness of our strength at the finish of the war. There was no doubt that the enemy defence would be crushed, although the enemy spared no labour to strengthen it. He concentrated a large group to, if not to disrupt, then at least delay the capture of Berlin. We realise that the last battle will be brutal. Fascist leaders will make any sacrifices to delay the hour of retribution for the blood and tears of millions of Soviet people, for the destroyed towns and villages. On the eve of the offensive, our compound in its entirety relocated to the Neisse River to a field site near the village of Barrow. In the regiments and at the division headquarters there were party and komsomol meetings. At them the soldiers discussed their tasks for the coming period. We were looking forward to the time C and were ready to fulfill the combat tasks set by the commander of the Air Army, General Krasovsky. Early morning on April 16th. Flight crew gathered by crew at the aircraft parking lots, waiting for the command to take off. There is a wary silence. Everyone listens silently, looking impatiently to the west. The last assault is about to begin. Berlin is ahead. Suddenly the air shook from the volley of thousands of guns, from the bursting of shells and mines. This deafening roar heralded, as always, the beginning of the offensive operation. The silence was gone, and with it went the tension of waiting for the battle. There were exclamations among the pilots. Here, give the artillerymen a light to the Krauts. They are pulling them out of their hiding places. With such a fire, now the fascists will feel like the sky. Rockets in the sky. It's time for our division's action. The first squadrons went to cover the combat areas of our troops from enemy air raids, and the artillery cannonade continued. At that time, a growing rumble in the air made all of us look up. Over the airfield to the west went in columns of hundreds of bombers. They were escorted by fighter planes. We knew they would strike at the most important objects deep in the enemy's defences and its reserves. An hour after them, to the front edge of the front stretched groups of Ilov. From the control centre gave a command to our pilots in the air. Do not allow any enemy fighter to the Nisi. The humpbacks are working on the river. Understood. There's no enemy in the air yet. We are searching. Transmitted the commanders of fighter groups. Today the pilots of the division have a special task to secure the actions of Ilov, putting over the Nisi smoke screens on the front of several hundred kilometers. It was necessary to blind the enemy at the front line of defense, disorient him, hide the place of forcing the river by the main forces of the front. The artillery preparation, which had been somewhat hushed after the smoke screens had been set up, rumbled again in full force. Artillery supported the crossing of advanced units and formations on the opposite bank of the river. Having forcibly crossed the water barrier, the compounds of the general armies and advanced tank brigades successfully broke through the first strip of the Nazi defence and were advancing to the second. In the evening, the main forces of the tank grouping of the front began to enter the breakthrough. In this operation, our division was to cover the tank army of General D. Lushenko. Two divisions of our Air Corps, Goregliad and Kryukov, protected from the air tank army of General P.S. Rabolko. We took into account the experience of previous battles, did everything to interact more quickly and clearly with the tank brigades. Our forward control under the leadership of recently appointed Deputy Division Commander Lieutenant Colonel Omrodyanov crossed the Nisi with the main forces of tankers Lelushenko. He took over the management of the actions of fighters on patrol. Oleg Makharovich Rodionov skillfully coped with the duties. It was felt that he had accumulated extensive experience in directing the actions of groups of fighters from the ground, and he had no shortage of combat practice. More than once he led groups on combat patrols, to attack ground targets, spent a lot of air battles. For his exploits he was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. In the air was complete domination of our aviation. Enemy pilots made attempts to break through to the area of fighting in small groups, tried to make assault strikes on our rapidly advancing tank troops, which were unstoppable, torn to the third line of defense. But the Soviet air fighters were on the alert. Patrolling groups rapidly attacked Fokkers and Messerschmitts, and those having failed to fulfill their tasks went west. During the pursuit managed to shoot down only a small number of enemy aircraft. In order not to return home with unspent ammunition, our fighters, having finished patrolling, struck at the retreating troops and enemy reserves. In the successful solution of assault attacks on enemy ground units played an important role in the training on the ranges, while still based on the highway. Not in vain we then paid attention to the accuracy of shooting and bombing strikes on ground targets. Now more than once we received information from the advanced tank units, which on the roads found burning Hitlerite equipment. On the third day of the offensive, tank grouping of the front broke through the third strip of the enemy between the towns of Cottbus and Spremberg, turned by the enemy into major defense nodes. Our units entered the operational space. The way to Berlin and Elba was open. Tank armies in a single impulse rushed to the northwest. The fascist command, realizing that a catastrophe was brewing, threw its last reserves of ground troops and aviation against the tankers of Generals Rybalko and Lelushenko. Groups of enemy fighter planes were desperately rushing to the crossings on the Spree to attack them. Air battles became fierce. Arrived in the morning to cover the crossings on the Spree 8, Konstantin Sukhov contacted Rodionov at the forward control of the division. "I am the 50th, came to work. Report the air situation. In the area of coverage of the enemy is not possible his approach at low altitude, camouflaged by the haze. Search there." Carefully watching the background of the ground, smoky from the fires, Sukhov found 4 Focke-Wulf 190. They were heading for the crossings. Having warned the pilots of the group about the enemy, Sukhov attacked the enemy group from the side of the sun. A lightning strike from above and 3 Fokkers burning fall to the ground. The 4th is trying to go up, but there is a group of Bondarenko. Pilots vigilantly monitor the situation. Seeing that the Fokker rushed upwards, they attacked and shot it down. Just had time to deal with the 4. As to the place of battle, came to the 8 Focke-Wulf 190. Again followed attacks on Hitler's machines. Sukhov and Golubev lit 2, and soon Bondarenko and Dushanin 2 more aircraft. At this time from the control room received a new message. "Sukhov, to you is the 3rd group of the enemy. Be attentive." Having ordered Bondarenko to fight with the 4, Sukhov pounced on the 6 Fokkers and a couple of Messerschmitts. They had already tried to attack the Ilov, storming the enemy's defense. A high-speed blow from above and 2 Mi-109s, leaving behind them a plume of smoke, crashed into the ground. Fokkers hastily hiding in the smoke, then at speed away in a westerly direction. Tense battle of our 8 with 20 enemy fighters is over. Shot down 10 enemy planes, their own losses are not. All this spoke of the increased tactical skill of our pilots, their ability to clearly fulfill their tasks. More accurate control of groups of fighters from the ground was also influenced. Combat tasks pilots performed with high dedication. Patrolling group of 10 fighters under the command of Major Kalashov, having finished barraging over the crossings, launched an attack on artillery positions on the outskirts of Spremberg. Powerful anti-aircraft fire Elikon did not stop them. They broke through the barrage and hit an important target. But several shells hit the airplane of Peter Gushek, an experienced and brave pilot. The personnel of the 100th Regiment felt the death of this pilot severely. A courageous man, skillful air fighter, he was highly respected by his comrades. On his combat account was 21 shot down enemy aircraft. Peter Gushek did not live to the near victory. The message about awarding the title of Hero of the Soviet Union to this brave fighter came to the division a few days after his death. General Lelushenko's tankers were rapidly advancing to Potsdam, bypassing Berlin from the southwest. We in the division headquarters closely monitored the operational situation, did everything to reliably cover our ground units from the air. It is necessary to take urgent measures to relocate regiments to the west. Otherwise we will lag behind the tank army, I said to the Chief of Staff. We carefully considered the options on the map. A good airfield was at Cottbus, but the city has not yet been taken by our troops. There is resisting a large group of the enemy. We need to look for a site, suggested one of the officers. And then we remembered that south of Cottbus pilots recorded the takeoffs of enemy planes. They found this place on the map, and an hour later an airplane went there to inspect the site. The report was positive. But we realized that the airfield would be close to the front. There could be complications. Still, I decided to relocate the regiments there. The first days were not very pleasant for us. Nearby continued fierce fighting with the encircled Cottbus group. Artillery shells of the enemy often exploded in the woods, on the border of the airfield. Airplanes could be damaged. And one evening I got a call from the Corps headquarters. There was a threat of a breakthrough counter-attacking group of the enemy from the Görlitsky direction, said the officer. I could feel the anxiety in his voice. Perhaps it is better for you to relocate east of Nisi. Once again, carefully analyzed the situation, the reality of this threat. If we redeploy, we won't be able to cover the troops. In addition, in the darkness, some pilots will not be able to find airfields or make a landing. This threatened to break down the aircraft and even disasters. And after all, we have their own forces to defend the airfield. I called the Corps commander. Alexander Vasilievich Utin listened attentively to everything, thought a minute. The conclusions are correct. You are a division commander, you are personally responsible for the subordinate units. You know better on the spot what to do in this situation. Act reasonably. I wish you success. We organized the defense of the airfield, put forward posts, strengthened surveillance. We equipped trenches, adapted buildings for firing. All this was done at night. The morning was spent in hard work, and by lunchtime it became known that the reserves of the front had repulsed the counterattack of the German enemy group, stopped it south of Spremberg, and later defeated. 2 days later were destroyed and surrounded in Cottbus enemy units. The danger of groups breaking out of the encirclement to the airfield was eliminated. The division continued to fulfill combat tasks, covering the tank army of General Lilishenko, going to Potsdam to bypass Berlin from the west. However, soon even this ground did not suit us. In this final period of fighting near the capital of Nazi Germany, from the commanders of all degrees, and especially from division commanders, constantly required reasonable activity, the ability to understand the complex situation, to properly direct the actions of subordinate regiments. I understood that the commander of a fighter division will properly direct the combat operations of regiments if he personally periodically participates in the performance of combat missions, driving groups, directly studying the tactics of the enemy. His combat sorties, personal participation in battles serve as an inspiring example for the flying staff. Of course, he should not turn into an ordinary fighter and miss the solutions to important issues of combat activity of the compound. And they are at the commander arise constantly in the dynamic and offensive operation of the front, characterized by high rates of movement of troops, especially tank troops. Introduced after the breakthrough of enemy defenses, tank armies and corps are rapidly moving forward. Do not give a foothold to the retreating troops, destroy suitable enemy reserves. The depth of the offensive in the first days of the operation allowed the fighter aviation to successfully cover the tank formations from the pre-operational basing. However, when they went to the operational space, where the pace of the offensive was rapid, fighter aviation can lag behind, if not to look ahead of the airfield's basing. Therefore, one of the constant issues in the offensive, requiring a decision of the division commander, was the advancement of fighter regiments based on the ground and air situation, as well as taking into account the weather conditions. The great distance of fighter base airfields from the battlefield leads to an inevitable increase in the flight time to the area of covering the troops. In this situation, the time of patrolling in the cover zone is reduced. It is necessary to change groups more often, which in turn makes it necessary to send small parties on a combat mission. When meeting in the air with large groups of enemy aircraft, they are unable to successfully complete their task, fighting in unfavorable conditions. The separation of the basing of fighters from the advancing troops is especially unfavorable when acting in difficult weather conditions. And this is exactly what characterized the weather in the spring period of the final battles in Germany. There were times when the weather at the base airfield was difficult, with low clouds and poor visibility. It allowed to make sorties only by small groups of the most experienced pilots. At the same time, in the area of cover, the sky is clear, no fog. This provided the enemy with the opportunity to fly large groups. It was in such conditions Bondarenko's wing had to operate. It was covering the tankers fighting southwest of Berlin. Bad weather did not allow to fly in large groups. We took off in fours. When breaking through the clouds, a young pilot, Vyacheslav Berezkin's wingman, broke away from the link. It was dangerous for him to go alone on the mission, or to search for the group. The time for his search was limited by fuel, because there was a flight to Berlin and patrolling. Therefore, the leader of the group gave the command to the young pilot to go to land. Only 3 airplanes came to the patrol zone. Bondarenko contacted Rodionov at the CP and requested the situation. From the control center, he was informed that there was no enemy in the air. His task is to scout the edge of the forest ahead and to report on the radio places of enemy assault guns, delaying the advance of our tanks. Bondarenko and his partner, leaving Berezkin alone under the clouds, descended to a low altitude and surveyed the terrain. They indicated the location of self-propelled guns and began to correct the artillery fire. At this time, in the area of cover under the clouds, approached at an altitude of more than 1,000 meters, a group of 12 Focke-Wulf 190, with bombs suspended under the wings. It is clear that it is preparing to strike at our tanks. Rodionov immediately gave the command. Bondarenko, a group of Fokkers is coming. Gain altitude and attack. It was easy to give the order, but it took time to reach the altitude. A pair of Bondarenko clearly did not have time to intercept the enemy group before striking. In this situation, Vyacheslav Berezkin, who was under the clouds, was not confused. Despite the overwhelming numerical superiority of the enemy, he, camouflaged by clouds, went to the rear of the enemy group, and a sudden attack shot down one of the Fokkers. The others at first scattered and threw bombs into the woods. But then they saw that there was only one of our fighters. Fokkers began to turn around to attack. Berezkin went into the clouds, made a maneuver. He again jumped out of the clouds in the tail of the stretched enemy group, again followed a swift attack, and shot down Fokker fell to the ground. Continuing to skillfully use the clouds, Berezkin shot down and the third Fokker. And when Bondarenko's pair came to the height, the enemy group stopped the fight and went to the northwest. Our fighters were running out of fuel, and they could not pursue the enemy. Courageous and tactically competent actions of Berezkin thwarted the enemy strike on the tankers. The battle ended successfully, but it could have happened differently if the enemy pilots had been active. It is impossible to count in the battle only on luck. It is necessary to create favorable conditions for our fighters. For this purpose, we need an airfield located closer to the area of cover. We understood that we cannot passively wait for instructions from above. On the airfields captured by the advancing troops, the commander of the Air Army, Krasovsky, landed units of attack aircraft and fighters to escort them. His actions were justified in conditions of weak activity of enemy aviation, and the ground troops required the support of Ilov. We decided to be active ourselves. I called Ledyshenko to the army headquarters, briefly told him about our difficulties. Asked to seize an air base southwest of Berlin, in Jutterburg. Tankers responded promptly. 2 days later, we were informed that the area of the base was captured by a tank brigade. Immediately sent their advanced teams of the 104th Guards Aviation Regiment and Airfield Maintenance Battalion. Decided myself to inspect the airfield at Jutterburg the next day. In the morning, I gathered regimental commanders to give instructions in advance on the order of their actions in my absence. Suddenly, a car with my deputy O.M. Rodionov arrived. "What made you leave the CP and come to the division?" I asked him. "I came to coordinate with you our further actions. Now began heavy fighting with the 12th Army of Wenck. From the prisoners learned that it was removed from the Western Front by personal order of Hitler and set the task to make their way to Berlin. Tankers, reflecting the offensive of this army, asked to cover them. I believe that the reliable fulfillment of this task will ensure the basing of our regiments at the airfield Jutterburg. It has recently been occupied by tankers. It's clear. That's what we're doing now. I'm going to leave for Jutterburg. You stay in Cottbus for me and direct the regiment's combat work. Comrade Commander. Let me go to this airfield. It's on my map, and I know the roads to get there. I won't be able to command here. I don't know regimental commanders and many pilots yet. It will be better if I go to Jutterburg." Rodionov spoke convincingly. It was felt that he had thought everything through in advance. He convinced me. "All right, Leave in my car together with the head of the Special Department Volobiev. He wants to familiarize himself with the situation in the city. I'll expect you back and a report by evening. Oh, M. Rodionov and La Voloboev did not arrive in the evening, as agreed. By morning they also did not return. Suspecting something wrong, we flew to Jutterborg in a pair of combat planes. We inspected the airbase from the air. It was a modern construction. On the southern edge of the city is a dirt airfield with shield barracks, to the west an airfield with a concrete strip and a large hangar, to the south 2 takeoff and landing pads filled with rows of Messerschmitts. Here apparently the Berlin air defense fighters were based and there was a factory transfer base. After landing on a dirt airfield, from which gave green rockets, listened to the report of the battalion commander on preparations for the reception of the regiment. My Deputy Lieutenant Colonel Rodionov and Major Volobiev left here. Have you not met with them? I asked the commander. They were here before our arrival, and then went to the western airfield, over there, with a hangar, showed his hand commander. And there exploded on a mine. What are you saying? How exploded? The chief of the commandant's office informed us that they, driving up to the hangar, ran into an anti-tank mine. Everyone in the car was killed. They were buried in the city cemetery. Stunned by what had happened, I stood in silence, thinking about my comrades in arms. How I regretted that I did not go myself, and allowed to inspect the airfield, Rodionov. Surely this would not have happened. After all, not once have I encountered that the fascists mined objects. Give me the car. Let's go to the commandant's office, ordered the commander-in-chief. The chief of the commandant's office explained the circumstances of the officer's death and drove with me to the site of the explosion. Here it is, the gravel road to the hangar, on which they turned off before reaching the asphalted turn to the airfield, hidden from here by a pine forest. We stood at its entrance, looked at the crater from the explosion and the mangled pieces of the car. Silently we bared our heads, honouring the memory of the dead. Then we drove further along the highway, on the main road to the airfield. At the crossing over the railroad line there was our tank blown up on a mine and a sign demined. Inspecting the base, we moved only on the concrete strip and taxiways, did not turn to the ground, where apparently lurked more than one mine. German fascism, living out its last days, like a scorpion in agony, sought to sting all living things. Returning to the commandant's office, I could not stop thinking about the hero of the Soviet Union Oleg Makarovich Rodionov and Leonid Andreevich Volobiev, with whom we worked so friendly. It was hard on the soul. Sergeant Mikhail Vasilievich Raychik, the driver of the car, died with them. Reflections led me to the conclusion that the cause of death was a professional peculiarity of combat pilots. Constantly being on the edge of risk in battle with the enemy, exposed to anti-aircraft fire, they sometimes lose their sense of caution and neglect the danger on the ground. This quality is familiar to me, but so far, as they say, lucky. Upset by what had happened, I returned to Cottbus. Setting tasks for the 104th Guards Regiment to fly to Jutterborg, I demanded from the commanders to warn all personnel about caution, to find an opportunity to involve sappers to inspect the base. I also sent there attached to the division battery of anti-aircraft guns. Squadrons after the task of patrolling landed in Jutterborg. The regiment was settling into its new location. The next day in the morning, the division headquarters received an order from General Utin to begin assaulting the encircled group of the enemy, breaking through the woods to the west. Their actions had to be coordinated with the 3rd Guards Army of General Gordov, standing on the edge of a possible breakthrough of the enemy. Taking Andrei Trud as wingman, he flew to Jutterborg. I reached the army headquarters by car and thoroughly worked out all the issues of interaction there. We returned to Jutterborg. By evening, Trud and I flew to Cottbus. I decided on the way to inspect the area of the encircled grouping of Nazi troops. Below, in the forests, along all the clearings were moving in a westerly direction columns of cars, armoured personnel carriers and columns of soldiers. The target was tempting. Unable to resist, began to storm one of the columns. From a gentle dive, I hit long bursts on cars and soldiers running near them. In one of the attacks, there was an explosion in the airplane. The cabin smelled of gunpowder smoke. Got hit by an anti-aircraft gun, I thought, and set a course for Cottbus. On the ground it turned out that a shell burst in the cannon chamber, apparently due to overheating during long firing bursts. I decided to take the group to the assault before dusk. Now I know well where the enemy is moving, and cannot miss the opportunity to strike. My airplane is defective, so I take another one from the regiment, leading one squadron myself and the second Trofimov. Over the forest area to the west of the Spree, I give pilots target instruction where to attack. I myself decide to suppress anti-aircraft fire, which lead on us from 2 armoured personnel carriers with 4 guns on each, vigorously turn the fighter into a steep dive. I take aim, press the trigger. After firing a few shots, the guns go silent, and you cannot get out of the attack to put the belly of the plane under fire of 8 Ehrlichen death. We must suppress them psychologically. I pick up the anti-aircraft guns to the ground and snatch the plane over the very tops of pine trees. Stepping aside and gaining altitude, I check the weapon. Total failure. Gathering the group after the end of the assault, lead everyone to Cottbus. At the regiment's command post, I heard the pilots' reports on the results of the attacks. We are interrupted by the engineer of the regiment, Kopilov. Comrade Division Commander, what happened to you? Why on your airplane in the slits of hatches and in the cutouts of the propeller coke pine needles? No needles. You'd better prepare the airplane for a combat flight. It's got a defective weapon. The plane has not flown for a long time. It changed the engine and weapons after not checked. Comrade Commander Kopilov waved his hands. Spring humidity, ammunition got damp and failed. For this I strictly punished the technician and the gunner. And about the pine needles, you still need to see for yourself. It's not normal. Having finished dismantling the flight, I once again examined the plane myself. It became clear that when taking the fighter out of a dive over anti-aircraft gunners, I caught the tops of pine trees. Fortunately, I didn't hit the tree trunks. It's good that everything ended normally. There seemed to be no reason to worry now. Pilots, always taking risks in battles, treated such cases calmly. Without worries, a little bit doesn't count. But I drew conclusions for myself. On the next day, the aviation of our air army carried out powerful bombing strikes on the encircled group of the enemy in the forests, stubbornly breaking through to the west. Assault actions were mainly entrusted to fighters. General Ryazanov's corps, which was armed with Ilas, at this time was striking at Wenk's army. Setting enemy tanks on fire with shape-charged bombs, attack aircraft actively helped our ground troops to repel its breakthrough to Berlin. Attempts of the enemy group to break out to the west created a difficult situation for our Poppy in Utterborg. One day, anti-aircraft gunners, who were preparing a position for their battery on the border of the airfield, suddenly discovered Hitler's infantrymen prepared in the woods to attack. It took seconds for the experienced soldiers to open fire. At the airfield was declared a combat alert. In the reflection of the attack took part and technical staff of the regiment. Low cloud cover did not allow that time to take off and make group air assaults on the enemy. Therefore, most of the aircraft were quickly adapted to fire from parking lots. Only a small number of fighters with experienced flying staff took to the skies. German airplane containers with small fragmentation bombs, which were on the airfield, also went into action. Armed men quickly adapted them for hanging to our fighters. Having received a message from Jutterborg about the situation, officers of the division headquarters immediately contacted the tank corps, asking for help. Very low clouds did not allow to raise their own groups of fighters from Cottbus. I still broke through to Jutterborg. By this time, the regiment had repelled the second Hitlerite attack with powerful fire. The enemy had no heavy armament, they threw it in forests and swamps. It helped aviators. The defense of the airfield by the command of the regiment was organized correctly. It provided reflection of enemy attacks during the day. But at night, the situation was unenviable. We understood that, using the darkness, the enemy with its mass will crush the defense, and, as a consequence, can be destroyed aircraft and inflicted great damage to personnel. We had to make another call to the tankers. They also had no free forces, but they did everything they could. By evening, when I was already looking at the road with doubt, a self-propelled vehicle and a platoon of tanks came to the airfield. They were put into action from the start. Fire from guns on the edge of the forest gave a high effect. From there soon began to come out with white handkerchiefs in their hands soldiers, and officers. About 3,000 surrendered. The rest of the night passed quietly. Only somewhere there was a firefight with small groups of the enemy trying to infiltrate through the airfield. The next day in the area of the base was quiet. To the north, however, an artillery cannonade rumbled from early morning. It was in the area of Luckenwald was the destruction of the main forces of the encircled group of the enemy. This is the law of war. If the enemy does not surrender, he is destroyed. The last days of April. The battle in the encircled Berlin was coming to an end. The headquarters of our division with 2 regiments moved from Cottbus closer to Berlin. We were assigned the task to cover from the air troops fighting in the southern and western parts of the city. Having solved organizational issues and set the task to the regiments, I decided to fly out as part of the 6 on patrol. It was necessary to examine the new area of fighting. And here we are in the air. Under US Berlin. The huge city was burning. I can't hide the feeling of pity. From here were given directives to attack our homeland. Here were formed orders for the destruction of Soviet people, the destruction of our cities. Well, the hour of retribution for Stalingrad and Minsk, for Warsaw turned into ruins, for all the atrocities committed by the despicable fascists in the temporarily occupied lands has come. Below us is the lair of the fascist beast. Hitlerism was writhing in its last agony. Fascist rulers, fearing retribution for what they had done, sacrificed the personnel of the encircled garrison and the civilian population. No, we did not feel pity for the enemy. But we looked at the civilian population with completely different eyes. It was hard for us, who knew the bitterness of the first years of the war, to see how refugees wandered along the roads, how German children, old men and women suffered. The heart of a Russian soldier could not stand it. We shared bread, came to the aid of the wounded and sick. Even before the flight, I familiarized myself with the operational summary. The troops of the 1st Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts were fighting hard in Berlin. Soviet soldiers were knocking the enemy out of massive buildings, tightening the ring around the Imperial Chancellery in the center of the city. There were literally only days left before Berlin was completely captured. Victory was near. Patrol time was running out, time to go home. There was no enemy in the air. The area is inspected. We're turning back to the airfield. And then I see that more than 29 Tu-2s and P-2s are approaching from the south. There are no fighters near them. Bombers aimed their strike at the center of Berlin. There was still resisting the enemy. There was heavy fighting. The walls of buildings turned into strongholds were falling down from the explosions of bombs. Smoke and dust rose above the area where Hitlerites still settled. I decided to delay leaving to cover the bombers from a possible attack of enemy fighters. In these days, afraid to engage in open combat, enemy pilots could wait in the side or behind the clouds a convenient moment. I, as well as all pilots, really wanted to shoot down an enemy airplane over the fascist lair. My mind persistently searched for ways of a possible meeting with the enemy in the air. And what if we use a technique that has repeatedly brought success? Maybe here too the fighters will try to attack the bombers after the bombing. The decision has been made. We take a group course to the western part of Berlin and gain altitude. I'm calculating the time of the end of the bombing. I've weighed everything down to the minute. Vigorously turned around and went to catch up with the bombers. Here are already near 9 P-2s. We examine the sky, there are no enemy fighters. Disappointed in the calculations, I began to overtake the column of bombers. Inspecting the rear hemisphere, suddenly saw how behind us fell out of the clouds 6 Focke-Wulf 190. At the same second our group turned to meet them. But the Fokkers, without taking the fight, went into a dive and, forcing the engines, rushed north. It was impossible to catch up with them, and fuel was at its limit. Besides, the aviation of our front was not recommended to enter the northern part of the city, where the units of the 1st Belarusian front were operating. Without a fight, we returned to the airfield, experiencing failure. After landing, Goyev came to me, regretfully said, Comrade Commander, how did we in the calculations of a blunder gave, to miss such a prey? Yes, delay 1 or 2 minutes from the turn, Fokkers would be in front of us, as in the palm of our hands. This time, unfortunately, the option did not work. This was the only encounter with enemy fighters in the last days of April. On May 2nd, The Berlin group of the enemy capitulated. The victory banner was flying over the Reichstag. On the Elbe, our soldiers met with the Americans. Only later we learned that Hitler and Goebbels went to the next world. Suicide, fearing retribution. Poisonous scorpions, who destroyed millions of people, killed themselves so as not to face the judgment of the peoples. Berlin was taken. And the war continued. Created in the territory occupied by the British, the new fascist government headed by Grand Admiral Dönitz actually ceased resistance to Anglo-American troops. Active hostilities against the Soviet army were still going on. Groups of fascist armies in Czechoslovakia and Austria stubbornly resisted our fronts. The First Ukrainian Front was also preparing to take part in the decisive defeat of the million-strong army group Center. On May 2nd, when the fighting in Berlin ended, the armies of the front began to redeploy southward to Dresden. From the air it was well seen how the columns of our troops were moving along all the roads. The Second Air Army also relocated to the borders of Czechoslovakia. Our division flew to the airfield Grossenhain north of Dresden. We covered the concentration of troops. May 5th, communications engineer Mazlenikov informed us at headquarters. Today, while tuning the radios on the airplanes, we listened to a radio transmission from Prague. Open text transmitted that there is an uprising in the city, the Czechs are fighting with fascist troops and ask for our help. This call excited all the personnel of the division. Everyone was waiting for an immediate attack of the front troops on Prague, before the fascists suppressed the rebels and destroyed the capital of Czechoslovakia. At the airfield, I was immediately surrounded by pilots. "Comrade Commander, why is our front delaying its offensive to help Prague? Let us fly there and storm the fascists." "Don't worry. The command has already taken measures. We can't act in a scattered manner. The necessary forces will be gathered, and they will strike a powerful blow. Get ready to cover the advancing troops." In the middle of the day on May 6th, northwest of Dresden rumbled a powerful artillery cannonade. The main group of the front quickly broke through the enemy's defense line. Tank and general armored armies rushed in the direction of the Ore Mountains in order to overcome them rapidly and reach Prague, to cut off the withdrawal of the grouping of Schörner's armies to the west. Air Army aviation bombed and attacked the retreating enemy columns. In these battles took part and regiments of our division. The shock group of the First Ukrainian Front, having knocked down the enemy defense, was rapidly moving towards Prague. In the evening of May 8th, pilots, who flew out to cover the advancing formations, were happy to report about the approach of tank columns to the capital of Czechoslovakia. Soviet soldiers entered Prague and thus saved the rebels from death and the city from destruction. In the middle of the night, having finished in the headquarters the planning of the division's combat day for May 9th, I went to bed. Instantly I forgot myself in a wary sleep. Shots near the house raised me from bed. What is it? The first thought, an attack on the airfield by enemy groups coming out of the encirclement. It cannot be. There was no enemy nearby. And the firing was increasing. First at the personnel barracks. Then there were machine gun and cannon cues from airplanes on the airfield. I grabbed the telephone receiver in the dark. On duty. What's going on? Why are they shooting? Nazi Germany has capitulated, Comrade Colonel. The war is over. We've received a telegram from the Corps to consider today, May 9th, as Victory Day. Didn't the Chief of Staff report this to you? We've already passed this message to the regiments. They're all saluting for joy. What orders were received from the Corps about our further actions? I interrupted the duty officer. There are no instructions yet. I hung up the phone and thought, realizing the greatness of what had happened. I remembered the hard days of retreat, victorious offensive operations, air battles, dead battle friends. In the mind grew pride for our country, for the party, for the army, who defeated the worst, cruel and terrible enemy. What to do now, I thought, not yet realizing what changes in our actions will make a new environment. The appearance of Abramovich brought me out of my musings. Dear Alexander Ivanovich, congratulations on the victory. Congratulations to you too, my fighting friend. Why didn't you tell me about it right away? I thought I'd let you sleep. How tense it was these days. To sleep through such a great event. Let's go to the pilots and technical staff and share with them the joy of victory. Near the barracks, where the personnel of the regiments were housed, we were met by jubilant pilots and technicians. Andrei Trud and Dmitry Glinka were immediately next to us. Our dear Commander, congratulations on the long-awaited victory. Let all the pilots kiss you, our father, solemnly said Trud, hugging me. Congratulations to you, Andrei and Dmitry, for having lived to see the bright holiday. Comrade Commander, Dmitry and I are miners from Krivoy Rog. We didn't fall underground, and in the air it's even harder to kill us. Congratulations, hugs with battle friends. We had to fight hard together, to share the bitterness of losses. Together we rejoiced in our victory. Political workers led by Mukhnev had already prepared an improvised podium for the rally. Short, joyful speeches, cries of glory to our party, glory to our victorious people, our victorious army. At the end of the rally, I took the floor. I congratulated everyone on the victory. I reminded about the fallen comrades in arms. In conclusion, I said, we've gone wild with joy. But we still do not know the situation in Czechoslovakia, I warned. The commander of the bowed to prepare for the evening gala dinner for all personnel of regiments and division headquarters. Comrades, vigilance must not be weakened. Soon we requested the Corps headquarters. We received confirmation the set combat tasks are not cancelled. In the morning, the first groups went to the sky for combat missions, impatiently awaited their return. The pilots reported that our tanks were in Prague. There was no fighting, the streets were filled with jubilant citizens. The next day, General Alexander Vasilievich Utin called from Prague. The government of Czechoslovakia is arriving in Prague. Cover the city securely. Various excesses are still possible, set the task of the Corps commander. I assured that we will take all measures and asked permission to the senior staff of the division to go to Prague. The general gave permission but warned that there was still fighting in the area of Melnik with the encircled group of the enemy. He indicated the route of the trip through Teplice-Shanov. On May 12th in the morning we left for Prague. We drove through Dresden along narrow passages cleared of debris from buildings. The city was literally disfigured from the impact of 1,000 strategic Anglo-American bombers. From the rubble-strewn basement bomb shelters smelled of stale cadaverous odour. And how many were left buried alive there? In the city there were about 200,000 inhabitants, mostly women and children. There were no enemy troops here. At least we have never received a mission to attack combat targets in this city. Do you think, I asked Boris Abramovich, who was travelling with me in the car, why our allies did not bomb Dresden throughout the war and in recent days turned the city into ruins? They did everything not to leave intact the city and factories in our zone, and to show us the power of their strategic aviation. I agree with you. This is where the perfidy of some of our allied leaders showed itself. These people will give us more than one pig. You can expect anything from them. Prague greeted us with music, songs, cheers. The inhabitants came out of their houses, filled the streets of the city. We were all literally carried out of the car in our arms. Elderly people and young people surrounded us. Girls in national costumes gave bouquets of flowers, and men treated us to the famous Pilsen beer. When we came here, we planned to see the sights of Prague. The main thing was the brotherhood and friendship of Slavic peoples, a great sense of respect that we took out of these warm meetings. By evening we drove back, on a straight road to Dresden. To the north, near a forest area, we were stopped by a patrol. We can't go any further, turn left to Teplice-Shanov. Why? I asked the soldiers. There's a battle with SS units ahead. They're trying to break through to the west. Everyone listened involuntarily. Frequent machine gun and machine gun cues and explosions were heard in the forest. Those bastards, fascist bastards. The fourth day since the end of the war, and they are still playing around, I swore and ordered to turn the car around. The second half of May passed quietly. We were getting used to peaceful conditions. The enlisted soldiers and sergeants were impatiently waiting for the demobilization order. One could understand them, they wanted to get to their relatives faster. Many had not been home for the whole war, and some knew nothing about the fate of their loved ones. These days we solemnly escorted a squadron of pilots and technicians to the Far East, wished them success. We realized that the war with the samurai could not be avoided. That's why all the pilots were eager to go to the east. Comrade Commander, why aren't we sent in regiments? We have a lot of experience in combat. Officers appealed to me. I had to explain. Ordered to send one regular squadron from the division. In the Far East, and without you will be someone to fight. A joyful event for me in these days was the appearance in the headquarters of an old friend from my studies at the aviation school in Perm Kostya Pilshchikov. After a friendly embrace, I asked him, "Kostya, why are you wearing an American uniform?" The POW camp where I was after I was shot down by an anti-aircraft gun at the end of the war was taken over by the Americans. They changed us, a group of pilots, into their uniforms and wanted to send us to England. But we escaped and made our way to our troops. Pilshchikov reported that he knew that Ivan Babak was in one of our transit camps in Czechoslovakia. We urgently searched the camps. And one day I brought Babak, exhausted with traces of burns, to his native regiment. There was a lot of joy among combat friends. At the end of the month began the training camp in preparation for the victory parade in Moscow. The combined column of the front included the commanders of armies, commanders of formations and heroes of the Soviet Union. Daily formation training began. Admittedly, we had gotten used to it during the years of war. After the first day of drill under the hot May sun, Dmitry Glinka rumbled. And for me, it's better to spend 3 air battles a day than to do shaggy sticks. Don't you want to go to Moscow? I too, at first, did not lay my soul to the formation training. But we're preparing for a historic parade. It's a combat task for us. However, soon for me classes were interrupted, called to Moscow for a diplomatic reception, which was arranged by Foreign Minister V.M. Molotov in honor of the victory. On May 29th, I flew to the Central Aerodrome. There was a car waiting for me. I immediately went to the reception. Entering the hall, I was somewhat confused. Such a solemn atmosphere, and I am in a field uniform. There was a lot to be taken aback by. Women in décolleté ball gowns, adorned with jewelry. Men in elegant suits and military men in dress uniforms. I was the only one among them in a uniform galife and boots. From the ship to the ball, I thought, feeling the surprised looks of others. Seeing the commander of the Air Force, Alexander Alexandrovich Novikov, I squeezed through to him, reported my arrival and said, "Comrade Chief Marshal, among diplomats and guests I feel not very awkward. Don't mind me. Now, as soon as the doors to the other hall open, everyone will hurry to the tables." And so they did. Feeling Novikov's favourable attitude to me, I asked him for permission to fly to Novosibirsk for a week, until the arrival in Moscow of the combined parade battalion of our front. Having received the consent the next day without warning my relatives, in order not to create an unnecessary mess, I flew to my native city. Novosibirsk met me with warm sunny weather, typical for Siberia in June. Joyful days with my family, meetings with my childhood friends flew by unnoticed. At the suggestion of Shibaev, the pater of the aircraft factory, we went to a bee farm in the taiga. In a light baby carriage we drove leisurely along forest roads, past blossoming hawthorn and cherry, through pine and birch groves. The meadows delighted with a carpet of grasses. Everything reminded me of my childhood. As a schoolboy with a peer Sasha Mokolov, having collected in bundles pies with kalina and cherry berry, shaneg with cottage cheese, we jumped on the footsteps of the cars of trains passing to the east and went to the taiga. We wandered through the forests, caught fish in taiga rivers and baked it on the fire, spent the night in huts made of branches. The forest parted, and we drove out to a vast meadow dotted with flowers. Dozens of beehives stood along its edges. A sturdy, middle-aged beekeeper greeted us cordially at the porch. It was Konstantin Konstantinovich Bessanov. In the distance stood his wife. We were placed in a room of perfect cleanliness, with well-fitted cobblestone walls, exuding pine aroma. The first thing was a steamy Russian bath with birch brooms. After it we drank delicious mead with bliss. It was a magical vacation. 2 days of walks in virgin forest. I inhaled the aroma of blossoming trees and herbs, listened to birds singing and bees buzzing. It seemed that we were in a fairy tale. The scale was leaving my soul after the terrible years of war. the exorbitant human grief I had seen. However, we had to fly to Moscow. Sad parting with my mother, Maria, and little daughter. Moscow. At once began intensified training for the parade. Red Square on June 24th. Loud music, banners, portraits of party and government leaders on the walls of the ancient Kremlin and on the Gum Building. The iridescent ringing of the Kremlin chimes captured us with majestic solemnity. Despite the drizzling rain that soaked our uniforms, we felt joyful. We were overwhelmed with a sense of pride. Our victory over fascism rose in all its greatness in our consciousness. The Soviet people, led by the party, broke the back of the bloody fascist predator. All of us proudly realized that we were active participants in the greatest war that mankind had ever experienced and had a direct relation to the defeat of the cruel and strong enemy. Our parade column of the 1st Ukrainian Front is built opposite the mausoleum, on the marble of which is inscribed the dear name Lenin. Under Lenin's banner, under the leadership of the great Bolshevik party created by him, our people defended the freedom and independence of the motherland, defeated the worst enemy of mankind, German fascism. All the eyes of the parade participants are fixed on the mausoleum. We are attentively watching the leaders of the party and government headed by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Joseph Stalin ascend the rostrum. Honored military leaders, marshals of the Soviet Union Georgy Zhukov and Konstantin Rokossovsky went around the parade columns and congratulated the participants of the parade with victory. Then the solemn march began. I was entrusted to carry the banner of the 1st Ukrainian Front. As soon as we passed the mausoleum, I handed it over to a specially allocated officer and went to the tribune for the command staff. Now, I was already looking at the parade from the outside. The clear beats of steps, the music of the orchestra merged with the ringing of orders and medals that adorned the participants of the parade. It was an impressive spectacle. At the end of the parade, more than 200 soldiers threw the banners and flags of the defeated fascist armies and formations to the foot of the mausoleum. Under them, Hitlerites were rushing to our land, killing and robbing, burning and destroying. And now their banners are thrown to the ground, as the whole incalculable Hitler's horde was defeated and defeated. I saw before me people who had gone through the fire of war, who had borne the brunt of it on their shoulders. And on the rostrum were commanders whose names were well known not only to the Soviet people and our allies, but also to our enemies. Under the leadership of these commanders, our regiments and divisions crushed Hitler's invaders. Involuntarily held my gaze on Stalin. I wanted to remember and capture these moments of the parade in my memory forever. The parade of the victors ended.